It feels good to be behind a microphone again, even though I guess I'm technically in front of the microphone, but that's neither here nor there. I haven't been able to post videos for a while, but I'm back now, and there's a lot to talk about. The damn world is falling apart. Of course, one of the main topics of discussion has been this coronavirus, this unreal pandemic that has spread across the globe and is threatening to kill hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. But also, if that wasn't bad enough, the pandemic has started an economic crisis on a scale that no one has ever seen before. So I'm definitely excited to get into all of that. Now, the first story I want to talk about is something that's kind of mind-blowing to me, and it's beyond me why this isn't being discussed more, why this isn't considered a scandal to most Americans. But in the middle of this global pandemic and unprecedented economic crisis, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, has dug her heels in and refuses to allow Congress to hold remote voting. Now, this is a completely ridiculous and untenable situation, seeing how it's unclear when Congress would ever be able to reconvene and have all 435 members sitting in one room to hold votes on legislation, when the health experts are advising everybody in the midst of this pandemic to not congregate in large groups. And it's not like there isn't anything for Congress to do. It's not like we're sitting around waiting for them to name a bunch of post offices or pass a bunch of useless legislation that they usually do. Right now, society, as we know it, is on the brink. And there are important policy matters that needed to be debated and voted on to avoid calamity. There needs to be a vote on a national rent freeze and mortgage freeze. There needs to be a vote on direct cash payments to every American citizen, not just people who are currently working and filed their taxes in 2018 and 2019 and also have direct deposit information on file for the IRS. No, for everybody. There needs to be a vote and debate on that. On so many other things, on healthcare. So many people have lost their healthcare because the unprecedented amount of people who've been fired and laid off because of this because of the coronavirus and the economic crisis that has started. So record numbers of people who are unemployed, and here in the US, our broken, disgusting, for-profit health insurance system that we have set up to provide healthcare to people is almost entirely reliant on people having a job that provides them healthcare. So when we're in the middle of a crisis that's causing unemployment on a level that we've never before seen in this country, Congress needs to have a vote on what to do to provide healthcare to the millions of people who are now uninsured, since we don't have a single-payer healthcare program in this country. All these things that weren't addressed in that sham stimulus package that they claimed was for the American people, which was really crumbs and afterthought to the multi-trillion-dollar corporate bailout, no strings attached, that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump all agreed was top priority in the middle of a global pandemic and economic crisis. So there is serious business that Congress needs to be addressing. So it's not a option to just shut everything down, since you can't have everybody there to vote on the floor of the House. That's not an option at this point. Nancy Pelosi has put her foot down and made the decision unilaterally that if the choice is between having Congress do remote voting, however it's conducted, or letting people starve and fend for themselves in this middle of this unprecedented crisis for an indefinite period of time, because Congress just won't be able to vote on any legislation, she'll choose that option over remote voting. And the excuse that she's giving for coming out against remote voting are silly and ridiculous and make absolutely no sense and are easily debunked. And I'll get into that later on in the video. But one thing that is crystal clear is Nancy Pelosi simply does not want to have these votes. She does not want to conduct these votes on the floor of, she does not want to have Congress voting on legislation right now, period. Now, we can speculate as to the reason behind it or her motives, but what is crystal clear is she does not want Congress voting on any legislation. The first excuse she wants to use as to why we can't conduct remote voting, it just makes absolutely no sense at all. She's saying for security reasons, Congress can't have remote voting. Now, if you just hear that and don't bother doing any critical thinking or looking into that claim, it might sound reasonable at its face. But what are we talking about here? We're talking about just having 435 members of the House convene on a video conference and on whatever the piece of legislation is and saying they vote yes or they vote no. Where's the security risk here? It's not like we're asking them to conduct highly classified government business containing the nuclear codes on fucking Skype. We're talking about having votes on emergency legislation, votes and debates on emergency legislation that is supposed to help people in the middle of a pandemic and an unprecedented economic crisis. What are you afraid? What are the security risks here? Are you afraid somebody might see you holding the votes? The votes are public on C-SPAN anyway. So it's not like the votes are hidden, and they definitely shouldn't be hidden from the public. This is all stuff that everybody needs to be seen. So the worst case scenario, if you have a video conference and to conduct remote voting, the biggest security risk you would have is maybe a hacker interrupting the feed and shutting down the feed, and you won't be able to hold a vote. It's not like somebody can hack into a video conference and pretend to be a congressperson and vote a certain way on a bill. That can't happen if you were looking right at the person through video conference. So like I said, the biggest security risk you have is somebody just shutting down the feed. And if that happens, you deal with it at the time. It's an IT issue. You do whatever it needs to be done to get the feed up working again, and then you resume the vote. That's not a reason to just completely dismiss the idea of remote voting entirely up front. That makes absolutely no sense. Now, the excuses that she's giving as to why Congress can't adopt remote voting are two. She's saying that there might be some sort of constitutional objection that the Republicans might make, and if they take it to the courts, the judges might slap it down, yada, yada, yada. But the fact of the matter is, first of all, there was an article in Vox a couple days ago where they provided a counter to her constitutional objections to this. They pointed out that in the Constitution, it doesn't explicitly say that Congress needs to vote. It doesn't explicitly give Congress a mechanism for which they record votes. Meaning that whether it's everybody conducting a voice vote on the floor of Congress or unanimous consent or however legislation is counted is not dictated explicitly by the Constitution. So that means you can count votes on the floor of Congress, or you can do it in a video conference. There is nothing in the Constitution that says explicitly that Congress can only record votes for legislation on the floor of the House. Furthermore, in that same Vox article, they made the point that the Constitution grants the Speaker of the House and a majority the ability to come up with their own rules for how the House conducts business. And it would be well within Nancy Pelosi's purview as Speaker of the House to have a rules change so that Congress can vote remotely in the middle of a pandemic. But the legal objections you may or may not face in court are secondary. What's the problem that is in front of you right now is Congress needs to pass emergency legislation, but they cannot vote in person. Therefore, the only two options available are not pass any more pieces of emergency legislation or vote remotely. Whether or not the Republicans make a legal objection to the rules change is almost entirely irrelevant. But this has become a pattern of behavior for Nancy Pelosi whenever she just does not want to do something that the base of the Democratic Party is screaming at her to do. She loves to hide behind technocracy and bureaucracy whenever, as a convenient excuse, whenever she doesn't want to take action. And whenever she can't hide behind that, she does this weird thing where she takes whatever argument the opposition would make as to why she can't do a certain thing, and then she acts like that's just the end of the discussion. There is no counterpoint to that. There is no retaliation or response to whatever argument or legal strategy the Republicans would try to use. Or the irony about all of this is she will ignore her what the Constitution explicitly demands of her in her role as Speaker of the House. She will ignore that completely, and her defense would be, her argument would be, well, the Republicans, they're going to be against it. So, you know what, in order to avoid any type of conflict, I'm just not going to do anything about it. Look what she did back during the Bush administration. She's Speaker of the House, I believe after 2004, maybe 2006. The entire country wants George Bush's head on a spike. He starts an illegal war in Iraq, lied the country into that war, did all types of torture, illegal, unconstitutional mass surveillance, violating international law, committing war crimes left and right, massacring civilians in the Middle East with no accountability. The country, and specifically the Democratic Party, the voters in the Democratic Party, wanted George W. Bush to be impeached. What was Nancy Pelosi's excuse for not doing that back then? Oh, the Republicans are gonna, I don't wanna divide the country. I don't wanna start conflict. But wait a second. Your job as Speaker of the House is to enforce the Constitution. And the Constitution says if you do 1 out of 100 of the things that George W. Bush did, as President of the United States, the Speaker of the House must conduct at least an impeachment inquiry, an impeachment investigation, and from there make a decision about whether or not to follow through with impeachment. But Nancy Pelosi did not want to do that. She did, for whatever excuse, whatever reason, whatever her rationale is, she did not want to impeach George W. Bush. So she didn't do it, and then she came up with a rationalization, all the different rationalizations and excuses that she did after the fact. And that's the same thing she's trying to do by refusing to hold voice votes, or remote voting for Congress. For whatever reason, she does not want to hold votes on any emergency legislation to help regular people during this pandemic and unprecedented economic crisis. So she's relying on these silly rationalizations like, oh, I don't know, maybe the Republicans will take me to court, and if they take me to court, then maybe the judge will side with them, and then we won't be able to do anything. Okay, so then why not just try? Why not just try? Why not just say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have remote voting. We can't vote any other way. If the Republicans want to take you to court, then that's a fight for another day. But to concede up front and say, okay, because a Republican might make a counter argument, which would be entirely ridiculous, and the optics alone of that, Republicans trying to block voting on emergency relief in the middle of a pandemic that threatens to kill millions of Americans, and also in the middle of an economic crisis, the optics of that alone is untenable for the Republican Party. So if that's the move they want to make, then let them make that, and then you defend your position. But it's the fact that she's just giving up front, she's conceding up front, it just tells you she has no interest in doing what needs to be done to help the regular to help the working class, regular, average voter in this country. She does not care. She got her multi-trillion-dollar corporate bailout for her donors, and she threw out a couple crumbs for the masses to say that she did something, to pretend like she did something, to save face, and act like she didn't just give the whole purpose of this wasn't just a giant corporate giveaway. She already did that, so she has no interest in conducting any more votes for the time being, for the foreseeable future, because she got what she wanted out of it.